Hi mathematicians, this is Mrs. Shopper coming to you with some information about independent and dependent variables. We're going to be building off of the graphing stories that we did where time was our independent, and then depending on what scenario we were looking at, it was either the height from the chest for the weights, or it was the height from the ground for the man who was walking up the slide, or the distance from the center on that ring-aroundy thing, right? So we're gonna be talking about independent and dependent variables. In science, you talked a little bit about that last year, kind of a cause and effect sort of scenario. And so when we do that, anytime you create a graph, there's an independent and a dependent. Typically time, if that's one of your variables, is going to be your independent. It's what you're controlling, okay? How long was he walking and how was his height affected, right? Or how long did it take for the plant to grow, right? So time is usually your independent. So in this case, when I look at a graph, my independent is always the x-axis. It's my input, it's my domain, all right? The output or the dependent is the temperature, all right? So when you think about, like this one is looking at classroom temperature. Over time, the temperature fluctuates, right? So in the morning when the teacher walks in, the classroom is cold because there hasn't been many people in it. It's the start of the day and it warms up. And then as students leave, less body heat is in the room and it drops. So this shows students leaving, students probably coming back in. It's warming more up or warming up more. And then at the end of the day, the temperature falls out again because it's just the teacher, or she leaves, or he leaves, and then there's really the temperature drops for the evening. Another graph over here, independent is time. Height represents the height of a tsunami as it approaches shore. And so this shows that over time, the height of the tsunami is gaining. It's increasing in time. So the height of that tsunami is dependent upon how long it's been since it started. Okay? We're looking at independent and dependent. So maybe a clearer picture here is the independent is a variable that stands alone. It does not need the other. The dependent variable depends on the other. Okay? Now, one thing I want you to know is that we have lots of different names that we're going to use for these. In 7th grade, more towards the beginning of the year, you talked about domain and range and input-output tables. So if I put this in terms of a table, an X and a Y table, sometimes you've called it an input-output table. This is the domain. This is your range. And now we're introducing you to the term of independent and dependent. Independent and dependent. Independent stands alone. For example, if you babysit or you mow lawns or you do some sort of job, all right, your wage depends on how many hours you work. So in that time, in that example, the number of hours you work is your independent variable. The amount of money you earn is your dependent variable, okay? Or for example, the amount of gas in your car and the miles you drive. The amount of gas in your car depends on how many miles you've already driven. When you've driven 0 miles and you've just filled your tank, there's a lot of gas in there. But as you drive more miles, the amount of gas in your car comes down. So the amount of gasoline remaining in your car depends on how many miles you've driven since the last fill up. Think about some other areas where we have independent and dependent. Okay? The longer you work out, the more calories you're going to burn. So as time increases, your calories increase. All right? But the independent, dependent variables are something we're going to continue to practice and talk about and look at how they work in terms of graphing and different real life scenarios. So independent and dependent. Independent stands alone, dependent depends on the other. Think about another scenario where that might happen, right? And write that down in your notes. We'll continue this conversation next time. Take care.